Good evening, welcome. I'm very excited to be here. We already went through a couple of welcomes, but once again to Dean Löwy and President Löwy and President Eichler, thanks for joining us. It's also our first day here in the Faculty of Architecture. We had a brief opportunity with Yehuda Kalai, the Dean of the department, to interchange and setting up the exhibition. But this is, so to speak, the starting point. Not an obligation, but a great, joyful moment, because it has also allowed us to reunite with old friends. Like Els, we know each other from the year 2000, when they actually visited Caracas in South America, where Alfredo and I started to work. And now, after many years, being a professor at the ETH of Zurich and else here at the Technion, at the Israeli Institute of Technology, we meet again. So what an exciting setting, what an exciting starting point for the next couple of days. And we hope to see a number of you participating in the workshop. Perhaps a few words. We just opened an exhibition, a pop-up exhibition, that shows not only work that we brought from Zurich, existing work, but we also contrasted, or we extended with the work from Els Verbekel on the east of Tel Aviv, together with the projects that we brought from our own chair and from the chair of Manuel Hertz, from the refugee camps of the Western Sahara, three unlikely versions of urbanizations, but urbanization which are in a process. They're part of a natural, almost organic process of becoming the city. And we put over there, under the title of this exhibition, Cities from Denial to Anticipation, a quote that I like to read to you, because as I just find out, President Löwy is a sleep scientist, and it is actually a quote from Italo Calvino, which says, because sleeping and dreaming is very close, right? Cities, like dreams, are made of desires and fears. Even if the thread of their discourse is secret, their rules are absurd. Their perspectives deceitful, and everything conceals something else. The city in a city in another city, like the dream inside a dream of Edgar Allan Poe. This is what I like to show to you, a few starting points. And this lecture is actually sandwiched, if I may say so, between a final lecture that will be presented by my friend and colleague Manuel Hertz at the end of the workshop, when we've discussed and also the hopefully already interesting results. We have learned, and I was very interested in that, Dean Kalai explained me that you have sometimes design studio of a semester in a week, because intensive work can actually bring very intensive and quick results. I think that's a very interesting exercise. Maybe it will not be a semester's amount of work, but I'm sure 4 days can produce something considerable. We have had this experience in the past, and I'm very sure that there will be something interesting coming out. A first test of this collaboration already has happened. Some of you have recognized it, some not, but you know, the adapter was missing between the ETH laptop and the Technion video beam, and as so often, crowdsourcing with the students was the solution. And thanks again to Gerhard Schmidt, who took off back to the hotel to pick his adapter up, so we didn't need it, but thank you for making the intention. So I brought, since we heard it already, we have a rotating deanship. I'm currently also the dean of our department, and I want to take 5 minutes to introduce our department. Why? Because I think it is important also for you to introduce us as an institution and open up also the possibilities. Hopefully a few of those that we can also discuss over the next couple of days. So this is actually our main campus in Zurich, not where the architects are, but where the headquarters, where the Stab is. But when I came in here this morning at the Technion, I photographed that sign. And I sent it back to Zurich, and I said, look guys, they're having a very nice welcome, and they wrote me back with an SMS, what are they talking about? There's nothing. And I figured out that the frequency of your announcement panel doesn't fit with my telephone camera. So what it really said was this. I don't know if you saw this coming in, but I think it's a very nice, nice first welcome. and a good combination how we fit together. So again, sometimes technology doesn't do everything, but I think with the human factor we come over it. So this again is our school, but the architecture department is actually a bit out of the city, just like your tower. I learned from Els this morning, it's actually a project of Oskar Niemeyer up on the hill, the Technion Tower. So the headquarters is down there somewhere, ETH, the foundation, more than 150 years ago, and our department, the Department of Architecture, is up on the hill in Science City. Very interesting place. We are excited to be there, and it's still growing. Our department, I really go very quickly through it, but what I want to point out, apart from the structure, which is different at all the schools, I think what I want to leave you with is we are a number of about 26 independent architectural professors and their chairs, and we have a couple of what we call institutes, and this is maybe something to also find the counterpart here to that while we're here. We have the GTA, the Institute of the Theory and History and Theory of Architecture. We have the IDB, the Institute of Historic Building Research and Conservation, and this is practically everything which is already built from the beginning of the foundation of the state to Israel to today. A lot of my colleagues say it's a big burden that we have to deal with too. It's not the 1% of historic buildings, but it's everything that is the built environment, so to speak. We have ITA, the Institute of Technology in Architecture, and we have NSL, which is City Network, City and Landscape. That's maybe where Els and myself are most rooted in. We also have, and I like to also put that at your disposition, we like to see ourselves as a university that educates the architect from a recent high school graduate to a very successful professional. So we like to think of us as a school that actually leads people through this process. A lot of schools have changed actually in mainly or only educating master's students, but we still have a very strong focus on the bachelor studies, and we bring students into the master's program and into continuing education, about 2,000 altogether. Again, this is how it looks. Obviously, we see ourselves, as I introduced you to those different institutes that circle around the design and construct center, the design professors, but in reality, it's permanently in movement, and it's also overlapping. So there's obviously a structure, but we generally also challenge that structure. A few of the things that we do, Gerhard Schmidt here is actually one of the people who masterminded the Future Cities Laboratory in Singapore, so we like to branch out to Israel and other places in the world, and I listed a few other topics here just to give you a taste, just to sort of open up this introduction between two schools. We're also very proud of our digital fabrication laboratory that recently won a national research grant for, if they're lucky, for 12 years, 4 and 4 years. This is only a model constructed actually by robotic production and assembly that gives you a student project that was translated in 3D reality, a window into the Singapore Future City Lab, where we also develop towers with a similar technology, but that shows you, so to speak, how our second branch, a few thousand kilometers further east, looks like. That's a structure that has been built in the city of Zurich, temporary but more or less permanent, also executed by students and designed in a semester project. I think a very interesting example. Something that is also happening is this sort of Monte Rosa house, something that has created a lot of visibility in the Alps, but also as a building, a practically sustainable, a building that can not only operate in a hostile environment like that, but it can also produce all its sort of necessary resources and energy. And we think that we can translate that also in the city. This is the nest building of the Emper Research Group, designed also by Gramazio and Koller and equipped with different modules that are tested on site. So you see, we are not only about teaching and researching, but we like to translate and test it also in reality. And maybe to come closer again to what we're doing tonight, it's also about exhibitions of student work and the development of it that we like to show. We like to publish this work also. The ETH has a big output in publications. Obviously also something interesting that we want to share with you, because we're producing periodically at our department, at our chair, something that we call the Slum Lab magazine that looked in the past. My colleague Alfredo was here 2 years ago, almost at the day, and he presented this magazine. And I'm bringing you a new version for your library, which is this one, and the outcome of this workshop, and this is the plan. And we have secured also the necessary funding for it. The outcome of the workshop and probably a continuation of 2-3 months longer will result also in a new issue of one of those magazines. So I think problem-oriented work and project work always is the best medicine to keep people together and to keep going. So once again, I mentioned already that we are roughly 2,000 students. Here you have the numbers. We're flattening, so to speak, out on it, but I'll leave you with that and step into the lecture. But I didn't want to miss the opportunity to sort of introduce our department on a level of, on a general level, to give you a good idea with whom you're dealing. We already heard this is a project of cooperation, and we think that a lot of development opportunities are actually in active collaboration and cooperation. And cooperation is always also a change of perspectives, right? You all know this picture, obviously. You see it almost every other month. But actually, secretly, this photograph celebrated its 40th birthday just a couple of months back, which was brought back by Apollo 11, which is the most famous photograph in history, I was told. And it's the view on the Earth. The blue marble came out of it. And I'm showing you that because it is also about the creation of consciousness, right? Researching and teaching, it's also about building up a sort of a consciousness in society and creating a sort of a theme, a topic for our society for the future. And as we look closer, this blue marble over time has actually turned into something else. It's not the blue marble anymore. It is actually a network of cities. This is what our, let's say, our societal challenge that in the last couple of decades concentrated actually much on the environment, on our natural resources. We are entering really in a new era, one could say. It's an age of cities, an urban age. And as much as you have heard over and over again that now more than 50% of people live in cities, it is not only about creating more basic data and more basic research, but paradoxically, we still don't know enough how to start on the next day, what to do with those massive data sets and with that research. We are challenged here in the universities and outside there in political and governance levels to synthesize that data and make something with it, something meaningful. And I would say as much as we are concentrated in cities, in South America, where I've lived before I came to Zurich to the ETH, you know that 50% has long become an 80% in Venezuela, 86, 90% of people already living in cities. And those processes are going now on in Asia and Africa, and they're certainly facing challenges to us. And I think this is also why we're very interested here in Israel, because you're a nation of settlers, of pioneers. And I think as much as the cities, and we're looking at Tel Aviv, at this corridor in Tel Aviv in the next couple of days, as much as they're still in a sort of a embryonic state, you might already get the taste of the problems, of the congestions we have heard, but it is certainly a step in development. Cities are not becoming into existence haphazardly, ad hoc. They're actually growing, layers over layers, and we have to understand also better how the protagonists and how those layers are actually fabricated. And we're looking not only at these embryonic stages, and I'll show you two examples, Torre David and the township in Africa, which are somehow a vertical and a more horizontal slum zone, if you want so. However, they are living in extreme densities. They are dealing in a sort of a resource scarcity situation. And in that sense, it makes them also laboratories and examples of looking at them. But it's not only about cities, it's also about people. this map, which is actually from an exhibition that we participated in at Harvard University, which was entitled Dirty Works, which invited people from all different continents to send data that was added up in this map. It shows you how population will continue in the continents. Red dots is population, black areas is land mass. And you see that in a lot of places, the footprint of the land doesn't fit anymore a linear development of the growth of the population. And that is challenging big problems to us. That can either mean we have to go more vertical or we have to find other organization formats. As I said, it's about the people. And the people are individuals like you and me, and I think we should never forget as we work on those mega structures and we look just like us here at the Israel Institute of Technology, you also look with technical means, but I think we should always link them back also with this lens of the social and of the cultural, what it actually means in different environments. And it means also that if we look at the economic growth that all those places represent, if we look also at the demography, that cities are going to be much younger. If you look now and you discuss with trend scientists, most of them, they will tell you that our biggest challenge of the next couple of decades is actually aging societies. That applies certainly to myself and to a couple of other people sitting here, less to the ones further to the back. I think we almost have an age pyramid sitting in this room here. But the reality in cities is actually that cities are becoming increasingly younger. They will become also older numerically. There will be big numbers of old people, but from a viewpoint of percentage, there will be a lot more younger people living in cities. And that is also connected with the demand for work, with the demand for education, for housing, with changing social formats. And this is exactly how the individual and how the people translate in the city. And I'll give you another example. If you look at a map of Caracas of Venezuela, this is in the east of Caracas. Only a few years back, this is not readable in this pixelation, but it actually says Zona Verde. Those areas were in the mapping, in City Hall, introduced as Zona Verde. Today we all know those areas look like that. A majority of the population lives actually in highly dense, choreographed, self-organized neighborhoods. And we have started, and this is my pretext before I lead you in those two projects, one in Caracas in a tower and the other one in South Africa in a township. We have started to look at them with more detail. And they are what we call, this is not a mountain full of houses, but this is actually a house the size of a mountain. And this house has many, many floors. And you could dissect and figure out what is actually here more or less connected and what is separate from each other. But I think this whole idea that cities are not an assemblage of different houses, if you look at the infrastructure, if you look at the land, at the very pretext and basis, we talked at a student review this afternoon about it, if we actually change again our perspective, we will come to a lot of new and different starting points. One starting point, for instance, is, and this is one of the largest housing settlements in Caracas, 23 de Enero. It was built for 55,000 people with these bloques and mega bloques. This is one of the mega bloques here. This is not by terms of the perspective of the photograph as a number of the smaller ones. They just made a social housing settlement for 55,000 people, which became, by informal extension, a city in itself with more than 120,000 people. And I think this is more or less, if we like it or not, we like to say Caracas is everywhere. We here, be it in Israel or in Switzerland, we are the exception. This is the world, the urban world. And I think even in Singapore, and I've heard it at the midterm review, in Asia people come to Singapore not to hope that they ever will become a sort of a Singapore, but they're interested to find out how they managed in 60 years to become from a colonial gambling and red light district island into one of the most modern cities and societies in the world. They're interested in this process. And it will be a lot more about this process thinking. This is what we believe. And I will show you also as a third example, you know, the traditional favela slum. You also have seen this before, the overlay between modernism and the slum, and you see more of that a bit later, this cluster of different towers, 5 altogether, this being the largest of them, this sort of squatting of structures. So there's not a clean separation anymore between one and the other, between modernism, non-modern, the vernacular, the refugee camp, the city planning, etc. But it is more or less an overlay of it, and that also requires, I would say, a new set of approach. And we like to think about it also as a right to the city. Lefebvre demanded that already in the 60s, but we think there's also a necessity, and here you see the water tubes going towards Mumbai. There's also right to infrastructure. By law, informal settlements in Mumbai are not allowed to be connected to the water system because the resource is too precious, probably something that you'd have to deal with in an arid zone like Israel in the Middle East as well. I think those will be, and those are already the big challenges. The right to housing, but you know, those rights are already laid down in texts, we all know them, you know, the UN Habitat is disseminating them. The question is actually, how do we do this? That's still a big question mark. It's very beautiful to sort of claim that right, that people are allowed to, you know, they're not sent by government to one place or the other. Now actually the Chinese government is sending them into the cities if they want it or not. Before they were sent to the countryside. But the question is actually how to achieve that. We think that democracy is certainly a very important tool in urban development. It's a very different ball game if you live in a dictatorship or in a totalitarian regime or in a democracy. I think there are a lot of models that will only apply in a democratic society. It is also about transparency. We were actually witnesses with a group of ETH students going to Sao Paulo when this favela was set on fire deliberately. At the time it was actually not known. Somebody saw the gas cooker caught fire, but this fire was set by developers. They were actually brought to trial, and the fire only stopped because it started to rain. But we can't count on those accidental rescue angels anymore. I think this is also why we called the exhibition over there from denial to anticipation. We have to anticipate more of that. And that is also why I like to show you, as a last slide in this set, the number one problem in cities is actually safety. It's not safety and security, I would say. It's not the water, it's not the electricity. You know, people can actually provide, and you know this probably from your settlements and from a lot of other areas that are organized, and we know it from slum zones. There are very different ways how to serve also a very big population with non-centralized infrastructure. But security, once again, more on a sociological society level, this is something which is very hard to recreate once it is lost. Doesn't matter why or where, but in this picture, for instance, you see the gunshots from the night from the gangs. The kids who play soccer here on this square, they paint circles around them, and this is again illustrating this overlay. So we, at our chair, we are interested in researching this topic. We started to call it more than 10 years informality, the informal city, but we also know that informality somehow points to the fact that we're dealing with issues that we are uncertain and we don't know enough about them. At the moment we incorporate them actually in our repertoire, in our vocabulary, they sort of lose this aspect of informality. To a certain degree, there's also a danger in it, but I would say we have to use the data that is available to us and sort of institutionalize also some of these seemingly informal activities to become part of our repertoire, how to build cities in the future and how to make them more interesting and more livable. One of our recent books, and we have it over there in the exhibition, and I brought you also here a copy for your library. Torre David is dealing with this situation in a formal tower. And this is why we also try to publish and disseminate that, and we will do this together. And this is also why we created the Urban Toolbox. And this is the last part of my introduction. I just show you a few ad hoc examples of what we have done in the past. Also projects that we were able to translate, let's say, from a sort of a research on the edge of what is possible, or on the edge of what was in the vocabulary of architecture, to something that has become mainstream. This, for instance, is a sort of an industrial design type that we called vertical gym, and we're building them by the dozen. We identified 100 sites for them. We offer them as a toolkit, as a toolbox, and we built them, and they provide 15,000 people per month a space to practice sports, but also to have a covered internal space, something very much needed in slum areas. We have proposed also culture to be seen and to be practiced in a more formalized framework, something that exists in all vernacular settlements, I think often much under-evaluated. We looked at a project today in the afternoon of some Berbers, of a Berber village, again something where one has to find also the essence of this culture and what that is. In this case, where we suggest a music school, that was the site of a former landslide, and we're using technology that is developed at the ETH in Zurich also, like, let's say, technologies how to capture resources, because in the same way as the Monte Rosa hut that I showed you earlier, as a jewel standing in the glaciers, a building in a slum area is almost as dependent on taking care of its own resources. There's no water network, no electricity network, etc. to plug in the slum area. And I think this independence or semi-independence from centralized infrastructure is something that is a lot more important in the future. And the last of the examples before I step into the tower and the Africa presentation is this metro cable system, again a technology that comes out of the Alps, out of Switzerland, a technology that we have helped to translate into other contexts, and the industry practically opened a new field for them, because what works in the Swiss Alps for the ski industry and for tourism, again obviously an important branch of the industry, as tourism also is, bringing this technology in another context, changing the perspectives, has practically opened a new field of application for the industry, but it's also raising new questions, and it asks us to become more creative, because this question asked here by the Harvard Design School, can designers improve life in non-formal cities, is still a valid one. To what degree we can provide appropriate solutions also against the resistance. I would say resistance is often accompanied to development. It's not that everything goes smooth. And this is what brings me now to these two examples that I promised you. One is this African adventure into South Africa, into a township of South Africa, where we have started to identify an area in Cape Town, the Khayelitsha township, behind the big Mesa rock in Cape Town, just off a few kilometers off the beach, where we have started to cooperate and collaborate with a local NGO, Slum Dwellers International, run by Andy Bolnick. They actually got a big grant from the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, also to develop in parallel a toilet module that is incorporated also in this building that I'm going to show you. A toilet module that is actually also a product, a co-product of EMPA in Switzerland, which is part of the network of the ETH. So there's a toilet module developed in Switzerland at EMPA, a sort of a dry toilet, a closed circuit, and we're developing a sort of a housing module. And what is this housing module about? I will not show you that whole movie, I jump over it, but I do want you to listen to the first sentences of this gentleman here.
I started to stay here, it was 1992. And I was staying in a terrible shack. When it's raining, because every winter season here in Cape Town, there is heavy rains. And we have put some bricks on the floor because the water runs through, in and out, you see. And you have to put the plastics on the top of the roof because the roof is leaking.
So this is the original house, and we took it down, but not without building within 24 hours a new house. And this is not about sort of providing an optimal solution, but this is about more, and I show you a few of the steps. Because we think we don't have the luxury anymore to assume that we will find perfect solutions alone in the ivory tower of the university, but that we have stronger to communicate with the real world. We have to figure out how things are actually working on site, and we learn from them, and we bring them back in our laboratory, and we change the material in the next version. This is still sheet metal, but I wanted you to hear from Pumezo, a half-blind community leader, that before he was actually living on the dirt. So his neighbor has actually this floor as the floor of the inside. So we learned we have to lift the building. They had plastic and whatever on the roof. We figuring out to find new and better materials. We brought, for instance, a photovoltaic system that has been developed by Hans-Jürg Leibundgut at the ITA, one of the institutes I provided you information on the first presentation about, because we think that townships, those endless areas, could actually become solar farms that provide electricity to Cape Town, that we could construct dependencies and relationships to something that has before completely separated from each other. There is, and you remember the fire also from before, in Sao Paulo that I mentioned, there is this problem of permanent fires like this one, which was actually just during our workshop that we had last summer in Switzerland. We invited a couple of people from South Africa to Switzerland. We have been in an industrial barrack, and we started to work on a few ideas. So what were these ideas about? One of them, blocking out. So while over time houses actually clustered like this, and this would be the organic growth without anticipation, with a lot of denial, because of course people don't have access, people don't have space, people don't have areas. Although there is a lot of area, mathematically you figure out that the area in between houses is actually sufficient. We figured out by reordering those houses, we could actually come up with an interesting plan that would provide sufficient space and territory. So if this is the original situation of Kailisha, and we took this area as a zone of 60 houses, we looked at it quite precisely. We figured out if we would add a second floor, which is eventually anyways happening, and we would iterate slightly the size of the ground floor, people would not only have more space, but in the examples that we identified, the few people that have 2 floors have either a shop, a garage, a kindergarten, or some other means of creating work and income in the first floor. So we thought that's a good idea. So let's say speeding up this process of building 2 floors has become one of the main exercises. So this is before, let's say, 1 floor settlement in the dirt, and we figured out, and it was part of the exercise also to understand better how those houses look, how they work, how they're equipped, how many people live there right now, and to find out how we can find and identify variations to that. And then we looked at this particular site, and we started to make scenarios, actually also with your chair, with the chair of Gerhard Schmidt. We had a couple of collaborators, because we also developed an app that allows the people, I told you earlier, Pumezo moved out for 24 hours. He actually only put his furniture in front of the street while we built the house, and then he put it back in again. You know, this is actually below the radar of the authorities. I have to add that too. It's a slightly, you have to forgive me, Mr. Eichel, it's a slightly on the border of illegality, because we are becoming complices of this sort of township policy. But the point is that we figured out if we can bring in some technology like this app, we can tell people to enter their name. We identify the house, what is red here. We take the house out of the neighborhood. We ask the people what sort of shape, future shape the house should have, what size it should have, second floor, etc. And then we put it back in again. So we can create a plan, a sort of a contract that everybody can see, that everybody can participate. We don't bring them to an office. We bring the office to the neighborhood. It's happening right there where they stand in the house or in front of the house. And the houses are built very fast and very quick. We actually have, I show you that at the end, we've made an exhibition in Zurich to raise some funds to continue this project. We have 60 houses. We sold actually yesterday, the exhibition went down 15, but we had a lady whose name will stay disclosed, but she said whatever house you didn't sell, I will pitch in for that. One house costs $6,000, and I think we can by now set up a sort of a factory of house building. This all comes out of a workshop with students in Switzerland. I think this is important to be pointed out. And it has led into a sort of a method. So the 3 examples that I showed you earlier, they were sort of ad hoc developed on site. But we think, and this is what this research and this applied research is about, we have to develop also more policy-oriented strategies. It is not that we can rely that people and bottom-up initiatives will solve the problems. The problem actually is that top-down and bottom-up doesn't meet. And I think we have to secure also that these bottlenecks and gray zones are getting out of the system. That's one of the important tasks. We also looked in South Africa on site what materials are available, not materials that we can get in Switzerland and we will never get our hands on in South Africa. Nevertheless, we also found people in Switzerland who are interested to invent and produce materials that would be fit for South Africa, like they would be interested to develop materials for tropical regions. I think there's also a demand and an interesting outset. This is actually one of our students, and the rest of the people are mostly from the community. And we went back down again just last December to build the house. We already had a prototype set up one-to-one in Switzerland, so we knew what we are doing. We didn't want to embarrass ourselves. So it was actually repeating a routine that we trained to do and that we knew how to do, and we knew where to get the material. And this is Pumezo and his family in front of his old house, and this is Pumezo and his family in front of his new house. Yes, it is still a hot metal shack, it's true, but it has 5, 6, or 7 aspects which are superior to what he had before. And as we're building 60 houses, we hope that as we learn better how to set the windows, where to put a sign, etc., and as we communicate this also in Switzerland, in a gallery actually, Ralph Eichler was at the opening, thanks again for coming. This is also the sort of support we need to make this project visible. So we showed that also in the context of post-apartheid, because there was actually a clear planning strategy for apartheid, and with the end of apartheid 20 years ago, that planning strategy didn't go away. The city actually has to work also on overcoming this physical separation and the creation of barriers that the very DNA of this development was based on, and also this is something we have identified. But we also know that we have to communicate that project, and films, you saw the beginning of one, is one aspect of it. Here were actually the 3 prototypes that we have found. One a kindergarten, one guy has a garage, so he offers services with his car, and this is a young man who also founded a company with his 2nd floor. These were all aspects of what we found interesting. That's one of the prototypes that existed already earlier. So I'll leave you with a few more of those images, and I come to my second and last example about the Torre David that I want to share with you. This is a project, I would say, with a less concrete participation in the realization of our proposals. Nevertheless, it was very interesting for us to research this tower, this giant of 48 floors, and to find also in Switzerland a partner who would accompany / finance that research. That partner was actually the largest elevator producer, Schindler Elevators from Switzerland, who shared our curiosity how a tower without an elevator can actually work. So I think we have quite illuminated people in those companies. They're not only interested in selling the elevator, but they're also interested in how it works. This would be a movie, but I jump over it because of I don't want to reopen the program again. So again, we're looking actually at prototypes that already exist. This, one could say, is maybe one of the low-cost housing possibilities. That was actually after a landslide where refugees moved in a half-finished building structure. So whatever you like to say about it, it actually serves to a big degree the purpose. Because from the UN Habitat terminology, what a slum is, this is not a slum because, for instance, it has a stable roof structure and a sort of a permanence. You see, this is a structure. It's not finished, no running water, no electricity. Structure costs about 30% of an entire building. So one could say with 30% of the investment, I could actually solve already a big percentage of the demand. If we think about providing 100% solutions, we obviously can only offer that solution to a much smaller amount of people. So we went out and we looked for more such buildings. Another unfinished structure finished by people who, I would say, illegally squatted it, but again an example that exists by the hundreds all over our cities around the world, also in South Africa, probably also in Israel. Until we found, I would jump over this as well, also a movie, until we found this cluster of Torre David, not because it's also the tallest and largest, but because we also thought it's the biggest environment, it's the biggest laboratory to research that provides us in a 1 square kilometer area an information of what else is necessary for sustaining such a building, because it's obviously not only the building, it's what is around it. It's about educational opportunities, workplaces, the possibility of plugging into resources again, and so forth. We found out, for instance, and I show you this, I tell you this while I'm going through a few of impressions of this tower. We found out, for instance, that the people in the tower are actually a 1,600 watt society. In Switzerland, we are a 6,000 watt society. Part of it renewables, part of it non-renewable energy based. But by researching, also with some of my colleagues from the Institute of Technology in Architecture, some South American PhD students, we researched the entire park of electrodomestics and equipment that people have in the tower. It's a squat, but it's surprisingly well equipped. It has also a wide range of programs. As you can see here from an evangelic church, a high degree of organization. This is the cleaning group that exists in the house that also gets incentives for doing that job. The building is also still on lower levels, expanded in the old ways, as you could say. And as we mapped and understood better how the building works, as we figured out how the apartments work and how the different sizes, family sizes and social units work, as we figured out that there are houses inside houses, you know, there's no facade, not only no elevator, but also no formal electricity, etc. That there's no air conditioning. There's a lot of no's that you would assume that a skyscraper should have. People use, for instance, tents within the floors to provide security for rain, but some of the areas are also quite elaborate and equipped. But I go further to this more research base. We figured out how circulation works in the building. Very important, because circulation also underlies, mostly because of security patterns, a certain logic. For instance, one of the logics is that this would be the parking building. In a standard office building today, you would go from the 10th floor of this parking structure down in the ground floor, enter the lobby, go through security, and move up again. So you're actually passing 20 floors unnecessarily, thinking that you would park your car on this floor and you need to go to an office here. This also has an effect on energy, and this also has an effect on your time. So there's a couple of questions that is coming up. We looked also on floor by floor, those people organized themselves, how human beings have actually replaced infrastructure. You see, this guy is actually smiling. He can't walk the stairs, but he knows in a few minutes there will be a couple of people coming, picking him up and carrying him down to the street. So people, individuals, can actually, in a well-calibrated society, replace infrastructure. That's also important for our Africa project, because as much as you could replace a lot of the necessary workforce or materials, etc., with prefabricated elements, one of the big challenges is actually to create work for this big number of people, meaningful and senseful work. So this is actually, instead of the elevator, people using this service with those motorbikes to drive up 10 floors in the parking structure. and then they move through a hole that I think you see in a later picture into the building. They also use gravity-driven water structures. That means they pump with very simple drown pumps water up the structure, and then with gravity they distribute it again in the building. So they bring it up a little bit higher than necessary to distribute it later with gravity. So I would say low-tech solutions, also very interesting. They don't build up a lot of pressure, but they have a system. They developed a system. This is the electricity situation. I won't elaborate on this. As I said earlier, it's not about ideal situations, but it's about understanding and improving them step by step, because we have also found that often it is not necessary to make this maximum investment, but to invest a minimum to sort of switch off one problematic point in the chain of events to make the overall system more robust. You know, maybe it's only to translate this electricity box from the facade where it's exposed to rain to the inside, and that might change the robustness of the system already a lot. We also figured out that there's a lot of commerce in the tower that certainly was not planned, but something that you can find now, and this is the famous hole on the 10th floor that actually saves you a lot of carrying power and the respective store next to it. So this hole beaten with a sledgehammer into a wall has actually become sort of symbolic for the entire project. And with a few of those images, going backwards here, here more images of the inside of the store. As much as you climb higher, the prices are also rising, quite a logic system, but then the shop owners made a deal that only every 5th floor the price is changing, because otherwise people would always walk one floor further down, and then they change what they sell. It's actually a natural economy that is building up. And we've also found that is interesting, because it practically reflects what is happening on the ground floor. And as we kept on mapping and finding and studying sports in the lobby, a gym on the top floor, actually with elements from Schindler Elevator, they immediately recognized their pulleys. We also figured out the energy peaks in the tower and what to do to sort of bring those peaks down in relationship to the neighborhood and to the necessary transportation. And I'll leave you with a few images translated into a possible future of that tower, where we looked at the situation. The tower is right now occupied until the 28th floor, and wind is actually blowing through the top floors. They're still empty, and we invented a sort of a low-tech elevator system that actually docks on only every 5th floor, where we started to use ramps. We developed with World Food System some sort of urban agriculture that could be carried out in the parking structure, in the areas close to the facade, to figure out what would actually be the entry points, not to participate in illegal squatting, but to work, so to speak, on a non-centralized infrastructure urban model, and how to translate that on a bigger scale, and how to translate those solutions. This is actually the hill where we realized the metro cable, how to translate that in the informal city. Because we think that the city of the future will actually be a sort of a new city. And as we talk as urbanists, as we like to talk about pedestrian cities, cities that use less energy, that produce less trash, that are creating marvelous view over the city, etc. We find many of those qualities already in neighborhoods that are very undesirable for us. So again, the question is not how to replace the population or how to entirely replace the physical mass and the structure, but how to inject with a minimum investment but a maximum of intelligence some game-changing moments to make those places more livable. And again, that was brought to the Venice Biennale, quite successfully so, but we didn't forget about the people in Torre David. We actually brought them back the lion also that we won, because we wanted to escape the suspicion that the thing is out of pure gold, which is actually not. It's just a heavy metal piece, but it's standing now somewhere in the tower. I'm sure we will never see it again. So thank you very much.